Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to my Bible reading journey. Today we're doing week 4, the book of Numbers. Long awaited. I know, fell behind quite a bit, but I'm back on it, right? So, week 4, uh, book of Numbers. What I realized from this, so the book of Numbers really starts off with the journey of the Israelites as they're preparing um, to to travel and reach the promised land that God has um, told them is to be theirs. And so after a year of staying on Mount Sinai, they've started to travel, like I said, from Mount Sinai to Moab, and then into the promised land, right? So the book starts off with the Israelites being sensed, right? They're being numbered and they're being arranged. Um, and the book does it goes into great detail about how they are to be oriented, or how they're to be arranged whenever they stop moving and they go to establish their site, right? um, the biggest thing I took away from all of that arranging and responsibilities and who's doing what is that um, the biggest part again was that the tabernacle, right, which is that holy place where God is to commune with his people, that is always to be at the center of this encampment, per se, right? And that's important because the way I took that is God should be the most important aspect of your life, right? He should be the center of your life, um, and then from there everything else can come can come out of, right? Everything else should be outside of that. It's also to be the most protected part, right? Your relationship with God. At the end of the day, whatever it is you do, um, your goal should be to keep that relationship safe, right? To keep it healthy, and the best way to do that is to put it in the center of your formation, the center of your life, the center of your encampment. Um, from there, after it talks about all that, it talks about how God is going to lead his people into the promised land, right? And he does that in the form of a cloud. During the day, it's a cloud of light that leads the way, and then at night it is a cloud of fire. So I can just imagine how awesome of a picture that would be to actually be able to see God in that form, leading his people. There's no denying that you're being led by the Spirit of God when there is a literal force of fire that is, you know, leading your path. So that's pretty amazing. Um, the next thing that the book of Number talks about are a bunch of rebellions. The Israelite people haven't really changed much in their ways in terms of how rebellious they are, right? And the book of Numbers really does a good job at showing how their rebellions throughout this travel starts off smaller. They're just kind of grumbling and asking Moses why he took them the out of Egypt, where they had security, where they had routine, into the wilderness. They constantly ask him if he just brought them out there so they would die, and it's this constant battle between Moses, the Israelite people, and God. Uh, every time the Israelites rebel, Moses does his part as a prophet and he intercedes on behalf of the people to God. And God, always being the gracious God that he is, always provides a way for the Israelites to continue. Um, Now, he does always exercise justice, right? He doesn't let those rebellions go unpunished, in a way, right? That there are consequences for those rebellions, but God does exercise love and grace, and mercy as he deals with his people. The next thing that came out to me was when they arrived to the wilderness of Param. Moses sent out spies, 12 spies, and their job is to assess the enemy land, assess how fruitful the land is, and how strong the enemy is, right? Assessing, because they know that they have to get through this land, and so um, they have to know what it is they're dealing with. And so um, when those people come back, right, when those spies came back, only two of the spies said that they were confident that God would see them through that land, that battle. The other 10 stated that the Canaanites would destroy them. They showed very little faith in God, and they went as far as to spread their version of that assessment to the people, and they incited a rebellion on that part as well, right? A mutiny against Moses, and so this one was tough. It was tough because um, God had God had wanted His people to enter this land, and instead of entering the land, God initially He wanted to destroy them, right? But because of Moses' intervention, He allowed them to live. He allowed them to keep living, and he um, he restated his promise to Moses that his people would enter the promised land, just not that generation. So the consequence of that rebellion, the consequence of that mutiny, was that the generation that had stated that they could not enter that promised land because of the strength of the Canaanites, that generation would wander the wilderness for 40 years, and they would all die off before they could enter that promised land, before the Israelites could enter the promised land. And so for the next 40 years, that's what they did, right? Now you would think that that consequence, right, would finally bring the Israelites people into cohesion, right, with Moses, but it kind of did the opposite again, right? So next, a group of Israelites, the Levites, they revolted and they challenged Moses and Aaron. They said that he had gone too far. They said that the whole wandering the wilderness for 40 years, that was, he kind of put that on Moses and Aaron as, this is your fault, right? And so they did. And so God, again, being just, right? Moses had interceded for the people, and he had asked God to intercede, and to deal with these Levites, because they are, one, they're rebelling, they're challenging Moses, they're challenging Aaron, they're inciting rebellion amongst the people, and they are on the verge of leaving Moses and heading back towards Egypt. And so God does intercede in this one, but He does so very, very carefully, right? He's very it's not just blind anger or indiscriminate death. He does a very incredible feat, where there's an earthquake, and the ground opens up, and it causes those Levites that were rebelling to fall into that opening on the earth, right? So the earth tore open, and all those Levites and all the people that were rebelling and against Moses, against Aaron, and against God, only they were taken down, and every last one of them was taken down. And so it's a very scary concept, because yes, God has the ability, and He can choose to completely eliminate a people that are going against him, that are rebelling against him, right? And throughout history, he has done that. But as we can see here, um, up to this point, the Israeli people had already rebelled and they had already mutinied so many times. And it wasn't until they had gotten to a point where they were actively going against God Himself, right? Getting ready to go back and undo what, and it's an attempt to undo what God had spoken would happen, right? And God stepped in to make it not so. So if you can only go against God so long before God enacts a correction, right? And so this is, at least my interpretation is, this is that correction. This is God coming in to the picture and saying, enough is enough. This is my will, and my will be done. And so, yes, right? It happened, um, but God spared the majority of the Israelites, right? So there, um, the Israelites are still roaming the wilderness. People complain again, right? Lots of complaining, which is, it's baffling to me, right? You're being led by the physical manifestation of God, and you're still complaining. And so they complain about food. They complain to Moses. This time, God instructs Moses to speak to a rock and to draw water from that rock by speaking to it. And this is where Moses kind of messes up, right? Moses, up to this point, he was still leading the Israelite people, even though that generation of people was going to die in the wilderness, right? As they wandered for 40 years. Moses, up to this point, he was still going to be allowed to enter that promised land because of that covenant that he had with God and that God had with Abraham, earlier on in the story. And so, as God instructs him to speak to this rock, Moses messes up. He lets his I'm gonna call it pride, right? He lets his pride get the better of him, and he ends up putting himself in the position of God, in a sense that, he's enacting, um, he's enacting judgment on the people, right? And this is what Moses says. He says, "You rebels, must we bring water out of this rock?" And then he hits the rock with his staff. He hits the rock twice, right? And after he hits it that second time, water comes from the rock enough so that, all the Israelites can drink, all their animals can drink, and then, enough for them to package themselves for the rest of their journey. And so it wasn't so much what Moses did, right? It's that he went against the instructions of God. God had told him to speak to the rock, and that the rock would provide the water. And I guess it goes back to that old saying, right? It's not what you said, but how you said it. Moses said, must we? One, he exercised judgment, right? He called the people, "You rebels," and then he said, "Must we bring water out of this rock?" Right? He's kind of taken on that personification of God, and he's making it as if though he himself, with God, is bringing that, not that God through him is providing this resource. And so that's an injustice to God, right? And so by doing that, he condemned himself to also be not allowed to enter the promised land, right? He is also to wander the wilderness, and then die off. Really, really big story, right? That one kind of meant a lot to me. All right, the symbol of the snake on the staff. So that's the next thing that happens, right? For this one, there was another rebellion, another mutiny that happened, and then God exercised justice, right? He exercised judgment on his people, right? By sending them a uh, poisonous snakes, right? But this one was important to me because what it did was it showed me that even though God is going to judge you, right? He is um, the epitome of morality, right? He is going to judge your immorality, and he is going to um, provide justice against that immorality. Every time he does so, he also provides a way for you to repent, a way for you to be saved. Um, so it's a really great way of. This is a really good story of him demonstrating his mercy, right? That even though he is carrying out that justice, he is providing a way for you to be saved, a way to salvation. So, and it was pretty cool, the snake on the staff, because it reminded me a lot of the medical symbol, right, which is two snakes coming around a staff. So uh, that was just kind of cool for me. Next is um, the Israelites are wandering in the plains of Moab, right? So as they approach the plains of Moab, the king there becomes worried that there are so many people on his territory, and so he seeks out the help of this uh, warlock, or this uh, holy person, right, named Balaam, and he asks Balaam to curse the Israelite people so that his army can defeat them easily. And so Balaam does try, but he realizes that not only can he not curse the Israelites, but he can actually only bless them, right? At one point, God actually enters a vision, or provides Balaam with a vision of the Israelites, um, as to who they are and who they're going to become. And Balaam 100% refuses to even attempt to continue to curse them, and he denies the king of Moab, right? And so this was really good, because this demonstrated to me that even though the Israelites, you know, in those plains throughout this entire travel, they have been rebelling, they've been complaining, uh, they've been, you know, mutineering against Moses and Aaron. Even though they've been doing all of that, God has continued to protect and bless his people, even without their knowledge. So, you know, um, as I've grown in my religious, age, um, I've wandered from God quite often, right? And so it's very refreshing to me. It's kind of peaceful to know that even in my worst rebellion, God was still protecting and blessing me. And even though I didn't see it at the time, I can definitely see it now. I would not be I would not be sitting here with you guys having this conversation were it not for God. Like there have been so many situations in my life where I could very easily have ended up, in a grave, in a very early grave, and so I am very, very thankful for all of that. Um, as I'm sure the Israelite people are um, in this moment, right? So the book ends with the new generation preparing to enter the promised land. They're starting to win battles, they're starting to gain some ground. Um, Moses is still alive, but God's not gonna lie to us. So before his people are able to enter the promised land, Moses is gonna have to pass away. So even though they're perfectly poised to enter the promised land, they will not be able to until that last individual from that generation does pass away. Right. So this whole book was the perfect demonstration that God is faithful to his promises, right? but that he will let people walk away in rebellion. And so we see that even today, uh, the most beautiful thing and the worst thing that God allowed us to have, that he provided us with, that he made us with, is that freedom, that free will, because it allows us to enter into a relationship with him, which is what he desires, right? That's why he made us. um, but it equally allows us to acknowledge, or to decide not to acknowledge even who he is, right? Atheism and what's the other one? Agnosticism, right? Is individuals that have been presented evidence for God's existence, and they have said it's either not enough or I refuse to believe it, and so it is their free will to do so, and it is an ability and a right that God has given us, and so um, I am thankful for that. I wish at times that it was easier. Maybe easier is not the right word. Maybe that I was more open to that evidence at certain points in my life, because there was times when I did question, and I questioned to a detriment. I questioned to a point where I denied it in my heart, or I chose to ignore it or refute it, because the way I was living my life, it was went against it, and so I didn't want anybody to tell me that I was wrong in that lifestyle, and so acknowledging it now, I obviously acknowledge what my faults were. I acknowledge what my sins were. Um, I do I do hand those over to God. I do ask for His forgiveness, and I accept His forgiveness, and Jesus' forgiveness. As He bled and died on the cross for me and for everybody else. And so I ask that as I continue to read these stories, I continue that, you know, I pray that I continue to learn and grow. And so, with all that said, I thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys on the next one as I read what's next. I believe it's Deuteronomy. I might be wrong. I believe it's Deuteronomy. All right, y'all. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.